Hello and welcome back to my channel where I discuss fantasy Formula 1. Today we're going to discuss the Limitless chip and why you may or may not want to use it for the Chinese Grand Prix. So if you've been sitting there with your fantasy team up on your phone, hovering that finger over the Activate Limitless button, well, this is the video for you. If you want a more extensive overview of each of the chips, I made an extensive chip review video. I will leave the link to that in the description. This will only focus on the Limitless chip and for China, Miami specifically. So why the Limitless chip? Well, as you can see by this graphic I have, it's the same graphic I used in my chip strategy video. I have assigned 4 of our chips to a couple of the sprint races this season. Why? Well, I personally believe that mathematically, these 4 chips, the Limitless, the Extra DRS, the No Negative, and the Autopilot, are best used during a sprint weekend. And in F1 Fantasy, you can only use 1 chip per weekend. This means that if you're going to use all of these 4 chips for different sprint races, you need to use one of them earlier. Well, why even wait at all? Why not use them all in the first 4 races? Well, the reason for that is that the later on in the season it gets, the bigger our team budget gets, hopefully, and thus you can afford a better team, and if you have a better team, you will get more points for using your chips during sprint weekends. Better drivers, better constructors during a sprint weekend gives you more points. So generally you want to wait with using your chips for the later sprints so that your team is better. Then why Limitless? Well, the Limitless doesn't care about budget, and in fact, it's actually better early on in the season, because later on for Brazil, Qatar, a lot of people will be sitting on high budgets, which means they can afford most of the big options that you would want to get on a Limitless anyway. You might even just have 2 or 3 extra assets over those strategists that are not using their Limitless. Meanwhile, in China, Miami, currently where we are at in the game, you're gonna have at least 4 more assets, 4 more premium assets than the regular players and the players that don't use the Limitless chip. So the difference is just much greater between your Limitless chip in Miami and non-Limitless users, whereas compared to your Limitless team in Brazil with non-limited users. So the Limitless chip is better used earlier on in the season. Previously, I said that I would probably use it for Austria, because Austria generally has a lot of overtakes, and that's also something you want to look at when you evaluate your Limitless chip. But why China then? Why am I suddenly changing my mind? Well, it all has to do with the meta. What is the meta? Well, it's something that I've heard on social media, and something that I've also used for the optimal team. And the optimal team that you want, period, is this combo, at least right now, before any substantial upgrades have gone through. Max Verstappen, Red Bull Racing, and Ferrari. Ferrari and Red Bull are just clearly the 2 best constructors currently. It's not even close. And Max Verstappen is the best driver. When Max Verstappen puts his ass in that car, you expect him to be first in qualifying, to be first in the race, and to have the fastest lap and come away with 45 points plus. And that's in a normal weekend. So in a sprint weekend, this is the team you want. You want to have these 3 assets to earn the most points in a sprint weekend. Well, to afford this, the minimum you would need is 105.9 million. And that leaves your other 5 assets to Valtteri Bottas, Zhou Guanyu, Alex Albon, and Logan Sargent. So Sauber, Williams, which currently do not look that great. Sauber might look okay if they fix their wheel nuts, but the Williams doesn't look great either. So this, to afford the meta, you need to have those other cheap assets. Some people, such as myself, can't even afford that. My current team value is 104.9 million, so I'm 1 million away from even having this as a possibility to me. I have to downgrade Max Verstappen to either Checo, Sainz or Leclerc. So this meta team is probably going to get you the most points for both China and Miami, and is going to get you a lot of points, especially if you can upgrade any of those cheaper assets that I talked about to one of the better cheaper assets, such as the Haas's, Yuki Tsunoda, or maybe even a Stroll. I personally call that the Meta Team Plus. However, we now also know how team value works in F1 Fantasy. I made an entire video about that, and it has completely changed how I approach the game. Red Bull Racing and Max Verstappen, although they're going to get you a lot of points, they're not going to increase your team value by as much as the cheaper assets will, because they're in that tier A 25 million plus category. This means that if you have the meta team right now, non-limitless, you just have this, a couple of cheap assets, maybe you can squeeze a Hülkenberg or a Magnussen in there, and then someone else has, well, say Sergio Perez or Carlos Sainz or Charles Leclerc combined with Stroll, Magnussen and Hülkenberg, although you will probably with the meta team get more points, the other player who has the non-Max Verstappen version of the meta team will gain way more team value than you over these 2 weeks. So while you might be ahead in points, they might catch up to you or even pass you in team value, which they can then earn later on in the season in terms of points, once they can now start to afford this meta plus team that I referred to, especially in Austria. Make the comparison for a second. You currently are sitting with the meta team, right? You have the meta team for China and for Miami because you intend to play your Limitless chip in Austria. Well, your meta team consists of Logan Sargent, Valtteri Bottas, Alex Albon, and maybe a Hülkenberg or a Magnussen, right? Those are your 4 other assets that you can afford. And those are the assets that you have for these 2 races. Well, maybe Logan Sargent decreases in price, maybe Alex Albon decreases in price. You probably will get an increase from your Haas asset, but maybe you're even in the lower bracket where your other 4 assets are the Sauber, Williams. Both Sauber wheel nuts don't work and they have 50-second pit stops, and your other 4 assets decrease in price. Well, when you get to Austria, you use your Limitless chip then, you get a bunch of points. Great. Well, compare that with someone who now is sitting on the Max Verstappen-less team for China and Miami. They use their Limitless now, gain the team value of those teams, because the team value does not matter in terms of the Limitless, but rather uses the assets that you had from your previous race. So they are sitting with this team that is built towards gaining value. They use their Limitless in either of these 2 earlier sprint races. And then for Austria, when their team value has increased by that much, they might be able to afford the Meta Plus team in Austria. So you used the Meta B team, the Meta Minus team for a sprint race, and then at Limitless, and they used the Limitless and then the Meta Plus team in Austria. If that made no sense, I have another graphic I'm going to show you, but essentially what I'm trying to say is, right now, before Austria, before people's team values start to increase, when you're sitting with a team that either cannot afford the meta, or you're sitting with a team that includes the meta but with bad cheap assets, using the Limitless now might be the better option. So how does this work for you? Well, basically, if you have no meta team, like myself, you cannot afford Max Verstappen, Red Bull Racing and Ferrari, or if you are sitting with the correct budget options, the correct budget options right now being Lance Stroll, Hülkenberg, Magnussen, and Yuki Tsunoda. If you're sitting with these options right now, I would consider using the Limitless in either China or Miami. Whereas, if you already have the Meta Plus team, you are already sitting with Max Verstappen, Red Bull Racing, Ferrari, and maybe this is your team, right? You have 3 out of 4 good options. Then I would consider holding off and using it for Austria, and only then. So what does a limitless team look like for China or for Miami? Maybe even for Austria, but there are rumors that big upgrades are coming for Imola, so I don't dare speak about Austria just yet. But at least for both China and Miami, I think the extremely obvious limitless pick is this. Red Bull Racing, Ferrari as your 2 constructors, and then each of their 4 drivers plus 1 more. That extra plus could be Fernando Alonso, it could be Lando Norris, maybe Piastri if you're feeling spicy and want a differential, but probably Lando Norris, and then either Russell or Hamilton. I think those are the 4 options that I would consider. But that obviously depends on how the team looks for that specific weekend, and especially for the sprint races this season, the team lock deadline is after the sprint race qualifying. It's before the actual sprint race on the Saturday. So you can even watch a full qualifying session for the sprint race before making your fantasy decisions, which I think will help a lot in determining which that final asset is going to be. So something like this, I think, is a very, very obvious limitless. I think you are shooting yourself in the foot if you're using the limitless currently and not going with these 5 or these 6 assets. The last one, that's sort of where you can be differential. If you think Hamilton would have a great race, if you think Alonso will have a great race, I think most people will go for Lando Norris. But someone like a Fernando Alonso could be a big differential in that position. Personally, though, this is my updated chip strategy for the F1 Fantasy Season 2024. As you can see, I've already used my wildcard in Japan, and I'm personally planning on using my Limitless in Miami as things stand. The reason I'm not using it in China is because I only have 2 of those premium budget options, as we've talked about. I only have Lance Stroll and Hulkenberg in my team. And I feel like even though I can gain some budget, because I'm sitting on Aston Martin right now as one of my 2 constructors, and Aston Martin is now a B-tier constructor, the budget gain from using my Limitless in China is not good enough for the negative that is the unknown of the Chinese Grand Prix, right? So my plan for China is to transition my team, get Magnussen or Yuki Tsunoda in, as well as getting Red Bull Racing in. I won't have Max Verstappen as my DRS boost driver. I will take that loss and instead go into Miami, use my Limitless and get Max Verstappen and all the other big hitters, and be sitting on Lance Stroll and both the Haas drivers for potential massive budget gains. And then for Austria, I can sit on that Max Verstappen plus team, hopefully thanks to budget increases in China, Miami, and the races in between. Because of that reason, I've also moved up the no negative. I was previously thinking of using the no negative later on in the season because it's better used in a sprint weekend. But now using it in Austria, since I will be having a few of the cheaper assets, since I want to afford that Max Verstappen, Red Bull Racing, Ferrari team, and then plus a couple of cheap drivers, I might have to go for someone like a Logan Sargent or Valtteri Bottas or Alex Albon, one of those cheap assets that I don't think will perform too well. And because of that reason, I think the no negative could be really good in Austria to avoid potential negative scores, obviously. For that reason, I've just moved the extra DRS down to Sao Paulo. It might as well be in Austin, but something like this now appears to be my strategy A, so to speak, for the remainder of the season. So thank you so much for watching this video. If there's anything that's still unclear, please leave a comment about it. I will definitely make sure to respond if there's anything that you are wondering about, if anything else was unclear. I try to get my point across, but it is a very complex matter, this, right? I will be continuing this F1 Fantasy series throughout the season at the very least. Look forward to my team selection video as always on Friday afternoon after the Friday session. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in future videos. Goodbye.